1.
At the National Press Club, the Australian Greens leader Bob Brown. He's an influential voice in the carbon tax negotiations and about to gain the balance of power. Senator Brown today outlines the Green Dividend, his vision of the Greens' role in Australian politics. Here's Bob Brown with the National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club for today's National Australia Bank address. When the Parliament sits next week, it will mark the beginning of a new era in Australian politics. In fact, that will actually occur this coming Friday on July 1 when the newly elected senators at last year's federal election take up their seats in the upper house. And in the process, the Greens, of course, will assume the balance of power in the Senate. It's been a long journey for Greens leader Bob Brown since his election to the Senate back in 1996. More recently, of course, very recently, he's signed an alliance with the Labor Party in government, and now the Greens will have even greater political power. To discuss how he plans to wield that power, what it means, please welcome Senator Bob Brown.
Thank you, Laurie, Morris. Ladies and gentlemen of the National Press Club and National Australia Bank, I want to say at the outset that I honour the Indigenous people of the Canberra region and indeed the Indigenous people of this great nation. I also want to say from comments I heard just last night on the news that the National Australia Bank's Cameron Klein is a sensible, rational and correct thinker when it comes to climate change options. Ladies and gentlemen, this Friday, the 1st of January, is the 28th anniversary of the High Court judgment which stopped the Franklin Dam. But in the preceding week of 1983, and I note some very wonderful dam campaigners from Sydney and Melbourne, as well as Canberra here today, Tasmania recorded the lowest temperatures in history. It snowed heavily to sea level, and the bulldozers in the Franklin and Gordon Valley were brought to a halt. So Mother Nature got in ahead of the High Court. Now, these events are a reminder to all of us that in the end, nature rules, not us. Earth does not need us, but we certainly have no option but this little planet which gives us life and everything. Yet back down at the Gordon River dam site, after the High Court decision, came a senseless act of vandalism which has echoes in Australian politics today. Aroused by the engineers of the Hydroelectric Commission and the government of Premier Robin Gray, dam workers took chainsaws, drills and a container of diesel oil to destroy the 3,000-year-old Huon pine tree known as the Lee tree. Smoke rose from the funeral pyre lit by that gang as Premier Gray helicoptered in and out of the adjacent works area. The great tree became collateral damage to Robin Gray's plans for power. As with Tasmania's Lee tree, so with Afghanistan's Buddhist statues of Bamiyan, or this year, Britain's Glastonbury thorn, which after 900 years was destroyed overnight by vandals. Human beings can be so oblivious, uncaring or downright destructive. So is life on Earth. 3,000 years ago, when the Lee tree was just a sapling, Egyptians were building pyramids. There were 50 million people on Earth, and 99% of the planet was a natural ecosystem. 2,000 years ago, when the Lee tree was in robust fecund maturity, Rome became the first city with 1 million people, and most of the Earth was still wild. 1,000 years ago, as the Lee tree became late middle-aged, I've got the feeling, there were 310 million people on Earth. Westminster Abbey was on the drawing boards, London had around 18,000 people, and China was getting gunpowder. Nowadays, 7 billion human beings are using up the Earth's renewable organic resources at an unprecedented rate. Inequality abounds. The richest 10% of us own 85% of the world's assets, while last year world food stores ran down and the number of our fellow Tellurians who were unable to feed themselves grew from 800 million to above 1 billion. For each person on the planet, when the Lee tree was starting its life, there are now 140 people. A century back, the world had amassed 1 billion people for the first time. But Australia had the highest standard of living in the world. Melbourne was laying out its tram lines. Soon it rivalled Chicago with multi-storey buildings. Melbourne was also helping discover antibiotics, leading the world in the campaign for the 8-hour day and making the world's first feature-length movie. A little later, Sydney was building the colossal Harbour Bridge. It overtook Melbourne in population. And it was inventing the rotating clothesline as well as the lawnmower. We had the world's leading soprano, the world's fastest swimmers, and down the coast, Lawrence Hargraves had a little earlier helped pioneer global aviation. Positive pizzazz was a national phenomenon. In 2011, we're all still doing very well by global standards. But where is the vision, the optimism and the drive to lead the world in this nation's political or corporate-owned leadership? How is it that 80% of Australians want laws for euthanasia, the right of the individual to die with dignity, and for equal marriage, yet the Labor Party and Coalition are blocking both? Why is it left to the third political party to advocate Australia's legal and moral responsibility to quickly process asylum seekers coming to these wealthy shores? Whatever happened to the national motto of a fair go? Ladies and gentlemen, every year's delay in tackling climate change threatens to cost us the Earth. The United Nations estimates that each year's delay will cost $1 trillion to the future. Climate change threatens the Great Barrier Reef, with death within 4 decades. Extinction of our fellow species is at a rate not seen since an asteroid smashed into the planet 65 million years ago. 70% of the world's fisheries are in collapse. And on a visit to Papua New Guinea last month with partner Paul, I discovered that a Sino-Australian consortium is ready to have robot bulldozers dig up the ocean floor thousands of metres down for minerals off New Ireland. This operation will be directed from Singapore. The tailings will be dumped straight back into our marine ecosystem. Meanwhile, Australia's uranium is turning up as deadly radioactive materials in Japanese fish and lettuce. About 80,000 people have been evacuated from the Fukushima Australian uranium contamination zone. And back here, as I'm speaking, I hear Martin Ferguson's addressing this same issue in Sydney. He's being challenged all the way by our Senator Scott Ludlam in pushing but he is pushing the same dangerous stuff to much less sophisticated markets than Japan. And in the midst of the mining boom, Treasurer Swan has cut the budgets of great national cultural institutes like the National Gallery, the National Library and the National Museum. There's not even any money for a dedicated footpath from Civic, the living centre of Canberra, to Parliament House. No matter what positive ideas are put forward for Australia, there's Tony Abbott and Barnaby Joyce saying no, and the polls are saying yes to no. The Howard government backed George W. Bush's invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan in the cause of democracy. Now, I want to just depart for a second to a late communication on that issue. Dear Senator Brown, says this email, during the visit of the then US President George Bush to Australia some years ago, I emailed you criticising you and suggest you resign for turning your back on him when he attended a joint sitting of Parliament. You probably never saw my email. I saw a few, I can tell you. Regardless of this, I wish to unreservedly apologise to you for what I now realise was ill-informed action on my part. Bush has shown himself to be a liar and warmonger. I have also since come to realise the Greens are the most credible political party in Australia at present. Thank you, sir, for that. I'll go back to the Howard government backed the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan in the cause of democracy. So why shouldn't we now join vigorous moves in Europe and at the United Nations for a global people's assembly based on one person, one vote, one value? Such a global parliament, and it could be right here in Australia, would tackle international questions like nuclear proliferation, currency speculation, marine ecosystem destruction, and those billion people who could be fed and literate if only a tenth of global military spending was sent to their assistance. Why should Australia not catch up with Norway, less than half our size, and have a sovereign wealth fund? Mandated female representation on corporate boards, determined global outreach for peace in such horror conflicts as the Sri Lankan Civil War, and as Norway does, funding for the protection of large swathes of the world's besieged tropical rainforests. As the Dalai Lama pointed out here in Canberra just a fortnight ago, being rich in the pocket is no certainty for being rich in the spirit. Feeling good about who we are and what we're achieving, having a vision for a safer, happier planet, is the real key to national pride and fulfilment. Let me quote Tasmania's great 20th century environmentalist and photographer, Allegas Trahanas. Speaking at the time of the destruction of the Lake Pedder National Park, Allegas said, and I've changed Tasmania to Australia, I quote, "Is there any reason why Australia should not be more beautiful on the day we leave it than on the day we came? We don't know what the requirements of those who come after us will be. If we revise our attitudes towards the land under our feet, if we can accept the role of steward and depart from the role of conqueror, if we can accept the view that man and nature are inseparable parts of the unified whole, then Australia can be a shining beacon in a dull, uniform and largely artificial world." What country is better placed than Australia to shine a light for the rest of the world? We Greens say let Australia be that light. Let us take the John F. Kennedy spirit, which put a man on the moon in 1969, and use Australia's wealth and vigour to upgrade global prospects for the 21st century. Next Sunday, 15 Green MPs, past, present and future, are getting together to celebrate the Greens' parliamentary history, now stretching over 17 years. And from Monday, 10 of us will be in the Parliament, including 4 new senators representing every state in Australia. We'll hold the balance of power in the Senate and share the balance of power in the House of Representatives, where Adam Bandt represents Melbourne. Around Australia, there are 24 more Greens in state and territory parliaments, including 2 ministers and a speaker, and more than 100 Greens are in local government, including several mayors and deputy mayors. We have more than 10,000 party members, 35,000 Australian Green fans on Facebook, thousands who follow us on Twitter, and tens of thousands signed up to receive our news and give us feedback. And last year, more than 1.6 million Australians voted one Green. Our 4 new Greens on Capitol Hill are Penny Wright from South Australia, Richard Di Natale from Victoria, Lee Rhiannon from New South Wales, and Larissa Waters from Queensland. I'm keeping my eye on the latter. She says nothing. She's made no claim on the leadership, but she's got an inside run. She's intelligent. She's on the up and coming, and I'm going to keep my eye on that, Larissa. Ladies and gentlemen, now I know a few media folk who are not so much interested in vision as they may be in division. Well, I'm going to be a disappointment. We Greens do have healthy disagreements. After all, we don't agree with cloning. But united by the Greens Charter, we are united on the move and ready to give Australians a big green dividend from Canberra. And we've got runs on the board. Last year we made an agreement for government with Prime Minister Gillard. Since we signed that agreement, and let me commend Julia Gillard and her colleagues for following it up, green dividends have been already achieved. There's good progress towards a 2013 referendum to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. Last week, at the local government conference here in Canberra, Simon Crean announced that Justice Spiegelman will lead an expert panel for a second referendum to recognise local government in the Constitution. $24.9 million has been allocated in this budget to establish a parliamentary budget office for costing parties' policies and promises. This was a Greens initiative, which I announced first here at this press club in the run to last year's election. The government has committed to substantial dental health reforms in next year's budget, and Rachel Seawart's National Dental Advisory Council is being set up to advise on dental care. The promised high-speed rail facility will be released next month. This visionary prospect for Australia, which Adam Bandt highlighted in his election campaign, has had both Italian and French companies visiting Australia in recent weeks. There's a national inquiry into electoral funding. Thank you, John Faulkner. And we will continue to pursue laws requiring truth in political advertising. There'll be a commission to set the ground rules for future leaders' debates in the run to elections on television. And I happily report all commitments met on meeting Prime Minister Gillard regularly, on new rules for question time in the House, and on weekly private members' time having been allocated in both houses. I also acknowledge the Prime Minister meeting her commitment for a debate on Afghanistan and going further to make sure that's an annual debate. For as you know, we Greens are the one party who believes in consistency with the majority of Australians that our brave, courageous and committed troops in Afghanistan should be brought home. Our first female Prime Minister's first year in office has been highlighted by rapid progress on the national broadband network. That's visionary. And a massive boost in spending on mental health, billions of dollars. That's visionary. And rapid assistance to people in several states suffering the impact of floods and storms. And I might add to that the move to have plain packaging on deadly tobacco advertising. That's world leadership. As well, Julia Gillard's agreement to guarantee $100 million for the solar flagships program, which has been strongly advocated by Christine Milne. This will ensure 2 more baseload solar plants will proceed in rural Australia, besides those already announced at Chinchilla and Moree. The government has also agreed to the Greens, and Christine Milne's been a driver here, reform of the fringe benefits taxes on corporate cars. This freed up $970 million for the wider national interest over the next 4 years, while cutting greenhouse gases. That's more than enough, Wayne Swan, to fully refund the National Gallery, the National Museum and the National Library, as well as other great institutes cut in this budget. In just the last 12 months, the Greens have been an ideas bank in Parliament on these matters. My Australian Capital Territory Self-Government Amendment Bill will, if passed, give both the ACT and the Northern Territory the right to make their own laws without being overruled by a federal minister. Adam Bandt's banking bills would ban the regressive $2 fee at ATMs. These are not allowed in the United Kingdom. Rachel Seawart's live animal export slaughter prohibition bill would stop the export of live animals for slaughter now, not in 3 years as in the Xenophon Wilkie alternative. export of live animals too often ends up in cruelty, as we have seen, and it also ships Australian jobs and profits offshore. Sarah Hanson-Young has presented the Parliament with her marriage equality bill. Scott Ludlam is challenging Parliament to set up a national container deposit scheme. Successful in South Australia, it ought to have been long ago successful right across this nation. Next week, I'll introduce a new bill to protect children from junk food advertising, not just on free-to-air television, but through all forms of telecommunications, including pay TV, internet and mobile phones. And I have to say to both major parties, really look at this. Listen to what the medical advice is. Look at the economic ramifications, if you can't see the social ramifications of the coming epidemic of obesity in this country and around the world. And overarching all of this, led again by my deputy Christine Milne, the Greens have put a carbon price and clean energy on the nation's political agenda. I remain confident that we, Labor and the Independents, can achieve an agreement to tackle global warming in the next couple of weeks. I might add, I've been to see the President of the Senate about John D. do something, the proposal for a 10% reduction in energy consumption in Parliament House to lead that campaign nationally. It's an easy thing to do, but boy, the resistance to a win-win, save greenhouse gases and cut your energy prices by 10% through the simple thing of energy efficiency. Now, we'll keep working on that one, and maybe one of these days I won't keep flicking off those lights as I walk around Parliament House on weekends, which are left on uselessly burning. Against such sensible action run a number of mining barons. They're not only opposed to a polluter pays scheme to give us clean energy, but they also oppose Australians getting a fair benefit from the mining boom. And they've got form. The mining industry derailed Ken Henry's proposal for a resource super profits tax. It spent $22 million on an advertising campaign, smashed the tax and blocked tens of billions of dollars from flowing to the Australian public. The Australian public owns the minerals in the first place. Only the Australian Greens opposed this putsch on Canberra. We will continue to campaign for the Treasury-formulated super profits tax, as well as for a sovereign wealth fund, so that all Australians can better benefit from this boom. As Canberra buckled under to the mining billionaire's bulldozer, it left a thinner purse for public infrastructure like bikeways, housing, solar power, cheap light rail in our cities, fast regional rail, and, between the biggest cities, high-speed rail. Labor's compromise on the mining tax may cost the public purse $100 billion over the coming decade. $10 billion each year missing from the budget as we try to give this Australia of ours good education, better hospitals, better rail services, better housing, assured security. But there's Tony Abbott, who sides with Gina Rinehart and Exstrata in opposing any tax at all. He would rob a further $45 billion from that thinner public purse. This mining industry, ladies and gentlemen, is largely foreign-owned. While Australia gets jobs, export income, royalties and company tax from our minerals, the foreign owners get profits, dividends, capital appreciation and influence. Most of Treasury's planned super profits tax is now due to end up in the deep, deep pockets of billionaires overseas, in Switzerland, London, Calcutta and Beijing, rather than in Australian schools, hospitals and railways. Some $50 billion reaped from Australia's mineral resources will be sent overseas as dividends to foreign owners, according to a Greens Commission paper which I am releasing today, Foreign Ownership of Australian Mining, by economist Naomi Edwards. Key findings in her report on foreign ownership and Australian mining profits include these. In the next 5 years, foreign owners will earn about $265 billion from their investments in Australia's mineral resources. Increasing foreign ownership is creating a significant drag on Australia's current account balance. Recently, Australia's net income balance broke below its long-term floor of -3%. It's forecast to deteriorate to -6% by 2013, worsening Australia's current account deficit as it goes. BHP Billiton's profit margin has almost doubled in the past 8 years, from 25% in 2002 to 45% in 2010. Well done. And BHP's profit margin on iron ore is 62%. But BHP is some 70% owned outside this country. For every dollar of sales, mining companies make an after-tax profit of 26%, versus the average across all industries of just 8%. You know, a super profits tax is not going to take that 26% to 8% like the much more job-intensive other industries, including manufacturing in this country. They will still be making a huge profit were Treasury advice to be taken. Net profit margins for copper and gold are 23% and 27% respectively, and yet they are being excluded from the government's mining tax. They should be included. And Australia's foreign-owned mining industry will ship $50 billion in dividends offshore in the next 5 years. Amid a mining boom, while the federal government faces budget pressures and as the Reserve Bank of Australia prepares to raise interest rates, parts of the rest of the economy are wallowing. This Edwards report, which shows Australian mining companies are about 83% foreign-owned, that means our mining companies are 17% Aussie-owned, that's all, underscores the need for the government to reconsider the mineral resource rent tax and the tax cut plan for big business. In the Senate, I'll again move to expand to the MRRT, including to cover gold and uranium, and will oppose the company tax cut for big business, that 1% further cut for the bigger corporations, but not for small business, and work to set up a sovereign wealth fund. I repeat, the mining boom is creating massive problems for other parts of the Australian economy. If the country's mineral wealth is not properly managed, many Australians will actually be worse off, and Australia's prosperity in vital sectors of the economy will be put at risk. Treasury's mining super profits tax would have preserved about 20% of the forecast foreign profits for Australians. The government should adopt the Greens' proposal also for a sovereign wealth fund to store this wealth for the needs of future generations. But instead, under Labor's reduced mining tax and the Coalition's irresponsible prescription to let the foreign mining giants off the hook altogether, no tax, Australians will be left in future cribbing on health, education and scrounging for funding, as I've said, for key infrastructure such as high-speed rail. Whichever way you look at it, Australia should have a better discussion about optimal mineral extraction rates. Iron ore may only last 25 years. Current rates, gold may only last 15 years. Also on value adding and, of course, profit ownership. While on resources, I want to laud all of those working to reach an historic agreement on logging in Tasmania, an agreement set to protect 572,000 hectares of the island's grandest forests, and of course that means its rare and endangered and magnificent wildlife. But let no public money flow to a Gunns pulp mill, or to the huge Malaysian logging company Tar An, or to the consortium now bidding to buy the Triabunna woodchip mill to keep it operating as an export woodchip facility. Let's leave all three entities to the free market. Should they complain? Tasmania's logging corporations have soaked up $1 billion in public subsidies in recent decades. And while we have no trouble assisting the workers and contractors into a different future, Not another public dollar should go to these big industrial logging outfits to destroy our wonderful national and world heritage forests. Well, ladies and gentlemen, from the wild forests to Canberra politics. The Constitution states in section 53 to 56 that, I quote, "The Senate shall have equal powers with the House of Representatives in respect of all proposed laws," end of quote, "other than those which create a tax or which appropriate money." It's agreed. Only the government can raise taxes. But what does the Constitution really mean by appropriate money? Is it a quantifiable amount with a quantifiable impact on the government's balance sheet? Is it spending more money somewhere at some point of time? It's hard to think of a bill which doesn't impose some cost on the taxpayer. Even a bill which seeks to reduce taxes will put a cost on Treasury's time and resources. The Senate and the House don't see eye to eye on the interpretation of this section, this vital section of the Constitution. Last month, a coalition bill to ensure workers aged 70 years or more have their employers pay the 9% superannuation top-up was ruled out of order by the Speaker of the House. The Speaker relied on the House standing orders, which are not part of the Constitution and actually go further than the Constitution to state that no private member can put forward a bill which appropriates money because it will be disallowed. Those House standing orders appear to rule out most private members' bills. That is, a past executive, which wrote the House standing orders, rules. Well, not in the Senate. The next test may be Sarah Hanson-Young's bill to establish a Commissioner for Children. Her bill is clearly neither a tax bill nor an appropriations bill. What will the House do with this bill if it passes the Senate? How does the Speaker rule her $1 million, that's about the cost, bill out of order or in order, having recently ruled out the opposition's $300 million bill? This matter is not justiciable in the High Court and cannot be left to the opinions of clerks or to unilateral standing orders. All parties should commit to a mature bicameral agreement to settle this issue before the lightning and thunder of a constitutional storm is unleashed in times ahead. The Greens are leading on the road to solving this quite crucial constitutional dilemma. I offer you this commitment as a further indication of how we will continue to serve Australia on our current responsible course. We will contribute sensible ideas to solve policy and political problems, and we will continue to work to provide stability for the duly elected Gillard government. Ladies and gentlemen, the Greens will be a secure rock of stability in the Senate to help make sure Australia gets the good governance it deserves. And to that end, we will not be supporting any coalition move in the Senate, whether by legislation or by amendments, that threaten instability. The coalition may move such a motion, but we will not be supporting it. Isn't politics exciting? I can tell you that it's a great privilege to be elected by Australians. It's not the office itself, but the gains made for the nation by having that office, which offer MPs real, deeper satisfaction. I think I'll never be a minister or get the Order of the Garter, but I doubt there is any elected representative feeling happier about their job right now than me. And I can't wait for next week's induction of the 4 new, vigorous and intelligent Greens senators to add to my sterling current team of 6. How organically sweet this greening age of politics is. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Time now for questions. We've got quite a long list of questions, some 15 journalists, so we may need to run a little beyond our normal broadcast time. Indeed, if you have the time for that, Senator, so we'll see how we go. First question from Andrew Probyn.
Senator Andrew Probyn from the West Australian. Your very good mates at the Minerals Council have today accused you of being a xenophobe with your comments about foreign ownership. They say that you've ignored the input that these companies have in the Australian economy, in superannuation and ownership and shareholders and so on. Regarding your comments, what would you do to drive down foreign investment in some of the most important companies in Australia?
Well, firstly, Mitch Hawke's comments on xenophobia. Look, he must think that the Foreign Investment Review Board comes out of the White Australia policy. You know, when you're in difficulty maintaining a debate in public, go for the person. And Mitch Hawke's a pretty poor example of that tactic. I remember him coming up to me in a plane on the way to the Earth Summit in 2002 in Johannesburg and saying, "Bob, why do you bother? We've stitched it all up in Bali. The then Howard government's going to block any action on climate change." And it turned out he was right. But I've learnt from that a little bit about the power of lobbying and the way in which some of the lobbyists work. When it comes to the foreign ownership of Australia's assets and indeed our investment overseas, what we're engendering here is a much better informed public debate. And this is not about xenophobia, and I wish Mitch, and I challenge him, to back our policy on asylum seekers. If he wants to show some credential that he thinks I don't have, I challenge him to back our policies, which I outlisted in that speech. I'm raising this debate now, but I think, for example, the Foreign Investment Review Board powers should be reviewed. I think when it comes to land ownership in this country, like New Zealand, we should have a registration of foreign ownership. I think the current limitation of the Foreign Investment Review Board of looking at investments of more than $231 million might well be reviewed, particularly when it comes to land ownership. And the agglomeration, as we're seeing at Breeza near Gunnedah at the moment by Shenhua, the big coal corporation, of one farm after another farm after another farm, with the potential loss of that magnificent food-producing country in an age where food resources are critical. Andrew, we need a much wider public debate on this. That's an indication of where I think we ought to be going, but I think in having the public informed without that sort of nastiness from an unwarranted and completely wrong argument from Mitch Hawke would be a good thing.
Gemma Daly.
Senator Gemma Daly from Bloomberg.
Hi,
you
Gemma.
were strident in your opposition to Singapore's bid for the ASX. I wondered if I can get your thoughts on Sab Miller's bid for Foster's Group. And also, you're talking about reviewing the Foreign Investment Review Board. The national interest always mystifies me a bit. Do you think we should have some guidelines and markers in terms of what the national interest is? And if so, what do you think they should be?
Well, look, I am not able to give you a definitive answer on that. What I'm trying to do here is to lead to the answers to the question you want by raising the public debate. I was astonished to find that 17% only of our mineral wealth is owned by Aussies. And I put it that way because I think most Australians, like me, have had the impression in the past that this was a great booming Australian industry. Well, it's owned overseas. And we ought to be able to know that and debate it. I'm not saying that overseas investment in Australia should be in any way trammelled, and indeed that Australian investment overseas should be trammelled. But we certainly need to review it, and we need to know the ramifications, because this outflow of money, as I explained in my speech, is impacting on the rest of the economy. It's making it harder. And you know, there's 200,000 or so jobs in the mining industry. but nearly 1 million in Australian manufacturing. And we're likely to lose a couple of 100,000 of those jobs in coming years if we can't get some sort of fairness here. And that's why I talked about the tax regime. We need to revisit the super profits tax just to get a fair go. And if 20 billion of that huge flow of money out of the country over the coming 5 or 10 years instead stays in the country and helps our manufacturing industry and helps keep those 200,000 jobs, that's a good thing.
Well, 2 questions down, 13 to go, so I would ask my media members to restrict themselves to a single question if they could, and also keep their questions short. Mark Riley.
Mark Riley, the 7 Network, Senator Brown. You must know you played right into the sweet spot of all the conspiracy theorists today with your support for a global parliament. I'm wondering how you would see such an organisation operating. Are you talking about an international treaty organisation that might sign up to collective commitments on certain issues, or something that might legislate and then come into conflict with national parliaments? And, excuse me, a little bit of a self-interest, if it is going to be in Australia, can it be at Jarvis Bay? Because that's where Canberra should have been in the first place, surely.
Yeah, but Jarvis Bay is so beautiful. I'd like to keep that national park right like it is, and nuclear power station free, I might add. I was doing my Windsor knot before I came here, thinking of the House of Windsor, and of course they always get wound into these conspiracies, don't they? No, look, we are moving towards a globally informed community that's got to live with itself. And we have always espoused democracy. I can tell you that the 2 moves the Greens have made for a global democratic support for moves in the United Nations have been voted down by all other parties, both in 2002 and earlier this year. This is conceptual, but I'm talking here about vision. Why should Australia not be the centre of what is inevitably going to be a global parliamentary governance down the line, if we human beings are going to live with each other on this marvellous planet of ours as we go on to the joyride of the future? Of course we're going to have to make consensus decisions. And representative democracy, as Winston Churchill noted, is full of flaws, but it's the best we have. And if we're going to, the point I was making, if we can invade Iraq and perhaps Afghanistan in the name of democracy, surely we can peacefully get behind moves to have a global governance on such things as financial transactions, which, with a Turbine Tax, could put an end to poverty, really. It's a great prospect. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, but I'm very happy to be helping build up the concept.
Lenore Taylor.
Lenore Taylor from the Sydney Morning Herald, Senator Brown. One of the reasons you gave for not voting for the carbon pollution reduction scheme was that it locked in too little in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. Labor and the Coalition have committed to a range of emission reductions and the conditions internationally upon which they would move up from 5%. Based on those conditions, what do you think Australia's target should be right now for 2020? Based on your own analysis of international situation, what do you think our target should be? And is it possible for you to support a carbon tax deal that left a 5% reduction as a possibility?
Well, Lenore, you want me to breach my agreement in the committee not to be giving information out till we reach agreement, but let me do the best I can. Yes, we did oppose the CPRS because it locked in any movement for at least a decade, and we can see the world changing on this quite rapidly. And so we've gone to the current committee talks, which there's enormous goodwill in there from the independents and the government, as well as the Greens. And I have to laud Christine Milne's work in leading our team in there. It's been exemplary and will continue to be exemplary. But on the question you asked me, the big thing we're wanting to look and have been working for is some upward flexibility built in from this platform for future action. Now, I can't tell you how we're going. If you say there's an immovable object in a irresistible force here. Well, so it has seemed to be, but we're all working together. There is give and take. There has to be. This isn't going to be a green outcome, but it is nation building, and it's essential. And let me finally remind you that Tony Abbott's alternative, and National Australia Bank CEO was clearly indicating this yesterday, is much more expensive. Not only that, it takes off householders and gives to the polluters, where we're going to reverse that. We believe the polluters should be looking after the interests of the households.
I was asking what you think the target should be, absent the climate tax.
Oh, well, you will know that our target has been up there with world targets of 25% to 40%. But if you're looking for that in the outcome, you're going to need a pair of binoculars.
Matthew Franklin.
Hi, Senator. Matthew Franklin from the Australian.
Hey, Matthew.
Hey. You kind of addressed this earlier, but I'll ask the question anyway because you may expand on your earlier comments. You know, as we all do, there's growing concern about global food security over coming decades. And in the circumstances of that, does it make any sense for the Australian government to stand by while the Chinese companies buying up the land, agricultural land, which could be used in the future to ease food shortages elsewhere in the world? And on the same issue, because you're talking about maybe we need to look at FIRB requirements, shouldn't we also be, for a government that is talking about putting a price on emissions and trying to address climate change, shouldn't we be actually thinking about ways to approve less coal mines, not more?
Yes, we should. And, you know, let's make it clear we're going to see in the wake of, I think in the wake of this agreement, any agreement that's going to come out of the hard work of parliamentarians at the moment, the extraordinary expansion of coal is not going to be stopped in its tracks. It's going to continue, but it worries us. And as Adam Bant commented the other night on Q&A, we agree with the Australia's own Climate Commission that we have to, by 2050, as many other countries, like Germany, be looking at renewables. When it comes to the land being taken over, I don't care whether it's Shenhua or it's you know, one of our great Australian corporations. What worries me about what's happening on the Liverpool Plains at the moment is there's small farms, some 4, 5, 6, 7 generations in ownership, being put out of business for a 20, 30-year coal mining venture, which is going to make the future of farming in the whole Murray-Darling Basin by the onflow of greenhouse gases much more problematic and harder. Garno has said that we could lose 90% of the productivity of the Murray-Darling Basin this century and a consequent threat to 128,000 jobs. Yes, it is an age of food insecurity. According to the UN, food prices have risen an extra 20% in the last couple of years due to climate change, due to burning fossil fuels. And here we've got in Australia governments at state and federal level who are saying coal first over food production. And they've just ticked off on an open-cut mine north of Toowoomba, which is going to be 11, on farming, previous productive food-producing land, 11 kilometres across. And that coal's going to be exported out of this country. Now, can't we do better? That's in the Sunshine State of Queensland. Shouldn't we be moving to renewables? Shouldn't we be making sure we do have secure and growing food production for a planet that's heading for 9 to 10 billion mouths to feed in 3 or 4 decades? We need to be reviewing this. And, you know, if you tend to open up the debate, you'll get epithets thrown at you like we got from the poorly reasoned Mitch Hook last night. But that's why I enjoy being a Green. I feel unconstrained by that because I feel the urgency of the issues you're raising, like food security and keeping small farmers. They're the most productive, by the way, 250% more productive than industrial farming on the land. I think we should be, for all manner of reasons, looking at giving them some security not just this gargantuan, largely foreign-owned coal mining industry.
David Crowe.
G'day, Senator Brown. David
G'day.
Crowe from the Financial Review. The Edwards paper that you've released today has a couple of options up the back, and I want to get your thoughts on whether that's policy or just a thought bubble. One idea is to slow the rate of extraction from mining. Now, you already have a policy which is to stop coal mining over the long term. Are you seriously suggesting slowing the iron ore or stopping the iron ore mining as well?
Well, I'm suggesting that we should review it. And I did so in my speech. You know, Dick Smith, bless him, has just written a book on the need for us to tackle the question of growth. And I don't think it's been reviewed anywhere in the country. It's as if even he can't raise the issue. We're looking for prosperity. But isn't it a worry for all of us that the massive iron ore repository we have in this nation may be effectively gone, certainly the quality of it, in 25 years, our gold resources in 15 years? Look, we believe in intergenerational equity, not just some unspecified imaginary techno fix. And we get happiness out of knowing we're passing security, as well as prosperity, to our grandchildren. And that means we must debate these issues. So that's in a consultant's report, but I'm glad she raised the issue because we should debate it.
Simon Gross.
Simon Gross, Senator for
Hey,
Science
Simon.
Media. How are you, Bob?
Real well.
I've got a question about population policy. It kind of relates to what Dick Smith's talking about. In your speech, you said that the world population is 7 billion. It's about 6.9 something. It's going to hit about 7 billion. It's going to hit 7 billion in October this year.
Thanks for that correction.
And it's on track to be about 8 billion, hit 8 billion in the middle of the next decade. Your population policy calls for a population policy directed towards ecological sustainability in the context of global social justice. So in the context of social justice to 8 billion people in the world, 7.9 something who would be in worse material health than Australians, what does that mean in the next 15, 20 years as far as your party is concerned for Australia's population?
Well, firstly, I'm somewhat embarrassed that while we do have a population policy, and the government's recently released one, and we were first on that, it is very vague. It doesn't. It's not specific. And everywhere I go in this country, people ask me about population. But two things there, Simon. Firstly, that's why we do need to be looking at food security in this country, and Christine Millen and Rachel Seward are working very hard on that in the Senate and through its committee system. And it comes back to that question of alternative uses of farmland. We have an obligation, not just a commercial reason, for seeking to produce food to be able to feed that 8 or 9 or 10 billion people before the world naturally will find a declining population by the end of this century. The second thing is, let's look at a Turbine Tax or a 10% reduction in global military spending so we can better feed the current billion people in poverty. Because what we do know is if you raise the standard of living of those folk, population falls even faster. Security brings a reduction in population.
The US Secretary of State saying that NATO should spend more on defence, so surely 10% cut in global defence spending is silly buggers.
Now you worry me, Simon. I disagree with the US Secretary of State. But
Phil Hudson.
Senator Brown, Philip Hudson from the Herald Sun. You'll be celebrating 25 years as a politician on Friday, and you would have seen a lot, including that the last party that had 9 senators and negotiated a deal with the government was the Democrats. And after that GST deal, they never won another seat. Last time you refused to compromise with the government, sunk Kevin Rudd's package and won 4 seats. How will you make sure any give and take, as you refer to it this time, won't disappoint your supporters and lead to the Greens being wiped out?
Well, Philip, firstly, you got a little bit of editorial in that question. We didn't refuse to compromise with the government. Christine, again, had more than a dozen bills before the Senate which would have fixed up the CPRS. They refused to take it on. And had they done that, we'd be cooking with solar. But that having been said, we are in the business of finding an accommodation here, and it's not easy. But we have a sectional mandate. We got 12% of the vote at last year's election. We will have 10 members of 240 odd members of Parliament. The difference between us and the Democrats is we're in the House as well. And the difference between us and the Democrats is there has been nothing clearer to our electorate than our wish to have a sensible policy on climate change brought into which didn't lock us into no future action in real times. And I think we can achieve that. Where I go in Australia at the moment, there is a very strong feeling of please, let's get an arrangement here. That's in business I'm talking about, as well as in the wider electorate. And I think we've got a very informed and very clued in thinking electorate on this. Our job is to get the best arrangement we can with them, and we intend to do that. I don't know if you want any greater specific than that one.
We've got 4 or 5 more questions. I would like to move on if we could. You happy with that, Phil? Yep, good. Paul Osborne.
Paul Osborne from Australian Associated Press,
Paul.
Senator. Given your long-standing commitment to accountability and transparency, and the fact that the carbon price has largely been negotiated behind closed doors, indeed there are secrecy agreements, cabinet-style ones, what's your view on the final carbon price package being sent to a comprehensive public parliamentary inquiry, or indeed a productivity commission independent inquiry to look at the final specifics of the package, which is expected to come out sometime in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I'm a senator, and there's no way this package will be going through the Senate without a public inquiry. So the answer to that is, of course there will be. But that said, we're moving to reach an historic agreement. And let me come again. We'll have Tony Abbott rattling on about no. He's got a few other matters to attend to at the moment, but he will come in on this. My question to Tony Abbott is: you go out there and explain to every householder in this country that your more expensive prescription, and better economists than both of us are saying it will be more expensive, will cost every householder in this country an average of $720 per annum by the end of this decade with no compensation. You know, he's a fraud when it comes to this debate, and he's not going to get away with it. And we've been busy working while he's been out there tub thumping, but we might find that he's bitten off more than he can chew in the coming few months of debate.
Paul Bongiorno.
Paul Bongiorno, 10 News, Senator Brown.
Hey, Paul.
Hi. Tony Abbott, as late as yesterday, said that in regard to the carbon tax, he would oppose it in opposition and rescind it in government. Can you now guarantee that that if he does win government and attempt to rescind this bill, that you will allow that bill to pass the Senate in the name of, if he's won an election on that promise, then he will clearly have a mandate? If not, is the only way he can deliver this promise is somehow down the track having a double dissolution, and is it in that sense a false promise?
Well, yes to the last question. I can give you a roll gold guarantee without taking this to my party room. I might cop it over this, but I'm prepared to hazard. I can give you a roll gold guarantee that when and if this package, after all this work on behalf of the Australian people, passes our Parliament, we will be giving it every guarantee for the future. And of course we won't be supporting a rescission motion by Tony Abbott, who, and I listened to his colleagues in the National Party, which ought to be recalled the coal mining party, as I say, coalition, C-O-A-L-ition. He ought to be listening to some of the sceptic, fatuous comments from his colleagues in the Senate on this issue. No, we'll engage in a sensible debate on it, but this is, of course, central to the Greens, so it will go to the Australian people. But while ever we're drawing breath in the Senate, we will defend the outcome unless it can be improved in terms of tackling climate change and making more secure the future of this country and this planet.
I should mention, Senator Brown, the ABC has been able to extend its broadcast window, so we have about 6, possibly 7 minutes left and 2 more questions. The next one from Stephen Scott.
Stephen Scott from the Courier Mail, Senator.
Hi, Stephen.
In what kind of time frame do you think renewable energy could seriously compete with coal? And if there is compensation given to